everyone, and welcome to another victorious episode of ARG Presents. I am Amigo Aaron, joined as... Whoa, wait a minute.
Oh, get the hell out of there.
What are you doing? I don't know. Give me that.
Welcome to another exciting episode of ARG Presents. This week, Brent, we'll be taking a look at the illustrious, the trailblazing Commodore VIC-20.
Yes.
Now, Brent, what do you know about the VIC-20?
Absolutely nothing.
You don't know anything about the VIC?
No, I came into the game at the Commodore 64 stage, so VIC-20, I didn't know it existed as a child. Never followed up on it. If I ever did anything, I always went to the Commodore 64.
Well, I'll admit, I only recently owned the VIC-20. I don't know what happened to it, and I never used it once. But that said, I did know about it. So let's learn a little something about the VIC-20.
Excellent.
So, of course, this was a product that was put out by Commodore Business Machines. Of course, the Commodore Business Machines were more well known for the C64 and the Amiga, and also they produced the PET, for which the VIC-20 was sort of a sequel or spiritual successor.
Yep.
But in its day, the VIC-20 was quite a good-selling machine. It was released in 1980 and ran for about 5 years. Introduced at a very low $299. Now, this is an incredibly low price. In today's money, you're looking at about $270. But this thing was the first inexpensive color computer available for less than $300. Very impressive.
Yes.
Now, it did have certain limitations. It could only display 22 characters of text per line. So as a business computer, it was okay, not great. It did have color. It did have sound. The VIC was the first computer ever to sell over 1 million units.
Wow. Hey, that's quite a feat.
Well, it beat Apple by a few months, the Apple II, when it did it. The VIC-20 at one point was selling 9,000 units a day.
Woo!
And sales at one point were up to $305 million a year. I was unable to find total volume net global sales for the VIC-20, but it was a big seller in the years it was produced.
You know what? I'm very surprised by those statistics.
What's that?
I'm surprised that they were ready with the manufacturing to handle that kind of load.
It's funny you should mention that because Commodore made all the chips that went into VIC-20.
Okay.
And if you know much about Trammell, the gentleman who ran Commodore, this was one of his big things. He would make his own chips. He ran with an iron fist, but that's a story for another time. Get this. Now, here's some stuff I didn't know. What does VIC stand for? Do you know?
Something integrated computer?
Wrong. Incredibly wrong. No, it was the video interface chip.
Oh.
The VIC-20. The chip was a chip that Commodore actually made a couple years earlier, and their plan was to use it to make video game consoles or to sell to video game manufacturers. No one took them up on it, so they just went ahead and made their own console with it, which I think is interesting. Now, here's something even wackier. Do you know what the 20 stands for?
The amount of memory it had.
Wrong again. A lot of people speculated as to what it meant. But actually, some of the engineers said that it actually was just a good-sounding number. They put it at the end, a friendly number, which I thought was amusing. Before 1982 in the VIC, you could only get games on cartridges or tape. And the cartridges were real simple one-chip carts. They were just a ROM chip with a program on it that just plugged in. There was no like custom chips, any of that stuff. The VIC has a composite video output on the back, and it could also work with your television. So it was sort of ahead of the curve on that as well. So the VIC was supposed to be like a cost-cut version of the Commodore PET. Now, the Commodore PET, it was was sort of the DOS-based Commodore, their PC in the day. Although really, I don't know how much this shares in common with the PET, but I'm not guessing too much. It only had 5K of static RAM. Think about that now for a minute.
Wow.
So the computer was made with Tramel's philosophy of computer for the masses, not for the classes. Right, that was his thing.
That's a good motto.
So when they put this out, they were aiming for that low market. Tramel had seen what the Japanese were up to, and he knew that you could capture that low market, and that's what he went after. So when the Commodore was first when the VIC-20 was first commissioned, they found and commissioned a guy named Scott Adams, sort of a famous programmer, to write a series of text adventures with it. And so he wrote 5 adventure games, and they were the first production run generated $1.5 million in sales.
Woo.
So these were popular games. Something else that they did that was unusual. Most computers, including the Commodore PET, were sold to licensed retailers, that computer vendors, real upscale.
Sure.
The VIC-20, no. They sold it at Kmart's. They sold it at Walmart's. They sold it in places they could get in cheap. Retail outlets. They were more than happy to let anyone sell it on the cheap side to attract that sort of audience for it. And it worked great, apparently. In '82, the VIC-20 was one of the best-selling computers that year. It sold 800,000 machines. And 1 million had been sold by the end of the year. And at one point, 900,000 units, as I mentioned, were selling a day. They had several peripherals for the Mac. The Mac. God, if we ever got on that road, we're in trouble. The VIC also had, aside from the tape deck, eventually they did release a disk drive for it, believe it or not. It also had one of the first commercially available cheap side modems that you could plug into the cartridge slot. Yeah, and sort of along the lines of the Coco, of which this was an early competitor, I might add. The VIC had also a sound cartridge that so much sort of like the talking ability of the Coco. The VIC had the same thing.
Sure.
So around about 90 or around about 85, they wound it down. And one of the reasons they wound it down was because the C64 had been launched and was basically filling that space that the VIC-20 held for the years it was out. It was a very successful computer and had a very good run. I will say one thing I thought was interesting. In Germany, they couldn't call it the VIC-20. You know why?
No.
I didn't know this either. This is some wiki trivia delight here. In Germany, the pronunciation of Vic was with a German accent were German curse words. So there you go. Now, just for fun, I looked up.
Do you know what they called it in Germany?
Yeah, the VC-20. The VC-20.
Oh, so they just dropped the I.
Right. So, just for fun, since we're not that familiar with the VIC,
sure.
I looked up some of the top games as rated by Retro Gamer magazines. Now, I like Retro Gamer. I don't necessarily always agree with them. But we'll see how many of these you've heard of, and some may surprise you. So,
all right, let's do it.
And these are in no particular order.
Okay.
So in '81, there was a game released called Jelly Monsters. You ever heard of that one?
Nope.
That one I seem to vaguely recall. It may even be like a Pac-Man clone or something. I can't remember off the top of my head. Then you had an arcade port, Amigo Race. That was on the list, 1982.
Absolutely know that game.
Pirate Cove Adventure. Not familiar with that one. That was an '81 release. Matrix. That was in '83. Not real familiar with that one.
Great movie.
Sword of Fargoal.
Oh, I might have known something about that one.
Now, here's one I knew quite well. Demon Attack, released in '83. Demon Attack is one of those wacky games that was released on a ton of systems. If you've got a Coco version, you've got an Odyssey 2 version, now you've got a VIC-20 version. So those guys over to Magic were trying to hit the ball into every field, which is good.
Shotgun approach, I like it.
And then the last couple here, Key Quest, released in '83, and Laser Zone in '83 as well. So not a lot of games I knew, but a couple in there. Amigo Race in particular, I'm very familiar with. So with all that in mind, we were tasked to choose 2 games from the, it's not a huge library of VIC-20 games, but there are some.
There are, yeah, you're right. There are enough that make you go, oh, there's some interesting titles in here.
That's right. So I'll lead the charge this week, if I may. So the game I chose, obviously, was Gorf. Gorf, which is is a port of the arcade game of the same name. Now, to give a little backstory to Gorf, Gorf in the arcade was released in '81 by Midway. Now, do you know what Gorf stands for? Didn't know this until I looked it up. I learned a lot about Gorf while I was reviewing.
I did not know Gorf stood for anything.
It does. It stands for something. Galactic Orbiting Robot Force. That's what it stands for. Now, some people just thought it stood for frog backwards, but that's apparently, and that's up to your own imagination, whether you believe that or not. So Gorf was a game, like I said, released in '81, and what stood out about Gorf there were a couple things. Number one, it was one of the first games that came out with stages.
Yes.
This game had 5 stages. Some would say these stages weren't entirely original.
Oh, well,
but they were 5 separate stages that sort of climaxed the battle.
Yeah.
It was also known for its kind of weird. It had that weird resolution of graphics. The same kind of resolution you would see on Wizard of War, for example.
The blocky
that kind of shimmery, higher res graphic that just had a weird feel to it.
I always thought Gorf was blocky. Res, I don't get.
It just had a dip that much like Wizard of War. We wouldn't say Wizard of War was high res, but you know what I mean. It had that weird. It looked different than other games.
It did. Right? It did have its own unique look. Yes.
One of the interesting things about it is that, much like Wizard of War, you could actually pop out basically one chip and change the game to Wizard of War. It's very similar. So the third thing that Gorf had was, and it's funny, this would come up a couple weeks in a row, it had digitized audio.
Yep.
And the Gorf guy would say, would insult you. He would talk about the Gorfian Empire. He would say I think he was more inaudible than the Berserk guy.
Oh, yeah. It was,
but it was still cool to hear, you're hearing this guy. This is '81. And we know how much that cost in '81. Yes. It was an expensive, foray into the sound area. But it was neat. But the main thing for me on Gorf was the stages. Also, it had a triggered, sort of Tron-like. It shares a lot with Tron. Same manufacturer.
Big old massive joystick.
Yeah, it had a triggered gun. A trigger, like a trigger joystick, which was cool. And it's funny, Gorf didn't really need that like Tron did.
Absolutely none.
But
none at all.
It did share that in common. And so you go through these 5 stages. Now, the 5 stages, again, much like Tron, you're up for debate on what exactly was original in this and what exactly wasn't. So the first stage is it's a Space Invaders phase.
100%.
And you have a shield, but it literally it takes up the whole bottom part of the screen. It's a long shield that's curved.
It's more of what you would think of as a shield as opposed to the little bases in Space Invaders.
That's right. Now, one of the major differences in the first stage, though, is that your ship at the bottom of the screen can actually move up and down under the shield, which I always thought was kind of cool. So you can literally get right up under it and fire through it, and that sort of the way the whole game was. Unlike Space Invaders, where your ship can only move left or right, this one can move up, towards and away. Yes. I guess would be the best way to put it.
Not even a fourth of the way up the screen, but you did have some vertical movement.
Right. That's exactly right. So then you get this laser attack mission. Now, some people will compare this to Phoenix, for example.
Yep.
To me, it was more demon attack-y than Phoenix. But again, this predated Demon Attack, so I guess it's vice versa. And in this stage, you would fight these ships. There were basically 2 little fleets, and one of each fleet had a laser ship that would shoot this long laser that could kill you. And once you knock those guys out, you just have to worry about getting hit.
Because they definitely kamikaze.
Yeah. And something that all the stages share was this little weird looking guy. It was like a red. It was almost like a Mr. Potato Head with little like things. He would be at the top of the screen or be part of the Armada.
Yeah.
The little guy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The leader type.
Always, in my mind, that was Gorf. He was just being a jerk. I didn't realize I was Gorf. So then you've got a Galaxian level in the arcade.
Yeah.
Galaxian level called Galaxian on the screen. They didn't pull any punches, and it was Galaxian. It was straight up Galaxian, with the difference being that you could slightly move up or back, and ships peeled off of a formation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unlike Galaga, where they would spin up and join a formation, this formation started
and
there was
came down.
So then you had this bizarre level where you were basically you were on the outside of this. How can we explain this? As in the middle of the screen, there's a circle, and streaming out of the circle were these lines. I don't know if you're supposed to be going through warp or something, and stuff would spin out of the inside of that, and you'd have to shoot it. I guess sort of Tempest-y, but nothing like Tempest at all. But I mean, I guess what they were going for.
It was more like Gyrus.
Yeah, that. You're right. It was more like Gyrus. Something again, not nearly as detailed. Of course, no awesome sound like Gyrus had either.
And in this stage, there's actually in the middle of the circle. There's dots around the circle, and those dots were actually, that's how you knew how many enemies were left.
Yeah,
because they would fly out in a spiral pattern.
This was by far the most abstract level. I mean, this was a weird level because it was just hard to judge. The guys spun out of this thing. It's the level my least favorite is this level. I mean, it's
really
sort of visually interesting.
I didn't like the Galaxian levels,
you know, but I mean, it's real strange. And so when you finally. And we should mention that when you finish off a level, there's this kind of neat sound, and then you would go into the next level, and the guy would badmouth you. So the final level is this level where the tables are turned. There's a shield on the upper part of the screen that's like sort of half oval, and then there's a ship at the top. The ship looks like I always thought it looked sort of like a chicken. It looks like a bottle with like like some legs coming out the bottom. That's all I mean, do you have a better descriptor for it?
It's obviously supposed to be the mothership.
Yeah, the mothership
of the attacking force, but it did definitely have a strange shape.
Right. So in this level, you have to kind of you have to put your shots through the shield and through the hull of the ship, and then there's a sweet spot you had to shoot. And of course, the entire time there's this thing's firing. They can even shoot this like a fireball thing that comes down. It's a big shot that can knock you out. And then if you blow this up, you've completed that wave or that level, and then you go back.
Right.
Again, your Space Invaders level and your Galaxian level were pretty much mirror images of the previous games, except for like less enemies. They were like probably about half as many, maybe not quite half, maybe like 2/5 of the amount of enemies,
and the
Galaxian, 3/5, I should say.
The Galaxian level was like you said, a dead rip-off Galaxian.
Right, but
at least the Space Invaders level had the unique shield. It was more like a we're protecting Earth shield, not we're trying to protect your ship.
That's right. So here's something I didn't know about the arcade Gorf as well. This, I couldn't believe this when I read it. I had to read it twice. And I had to corroborate my source on this. Gorf was intended to be a licensed movie tie-in with Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Did you ever know that? It's just true. This is a fact.
Okay.
The designers looked at the script and they realized they just couldn't make it work as a tie-in because it literally had nothing to do with Star Trek. If you ever seen Star Trek the motion picture, what you would have, the video game version of that would be one large ship that you just look at for like 15 minutes with a pan cam. That'd be the game. Because as much as I like Star Trek, that thing was boring.
Yeah, it was a rough one.
They had seen 2001, and they were like, we can do it, but slower. And they did. And so they basically reworked the game, not for Star Trek, but that's why your ship sort of looked kind of like the Enterprise, sort of. They just basically, yeah, I know, but and that's crazy. Now, here's something else I didn't know. I had to throw these in because I often we're going to cover Gorf. There was a sequel to Gorf called, I can't believe this, but this is what, Miss Gorf, all right? MS period Gorf. It was programmed, and there's a video from a show that never aired showing a bit of footage of it, right? The game is on source code on a set of 8-inch floppies, according to wherever I got this, and the programmer, the guy name was Jamie Fenton. He programmed it. And apparently, it's debatable to where this still exists on Earth. But apparently, at one time, it was shown somewhere, and there's video of this. So if you want to,
very interesting and probably disturbing to see.
So if you want to find Miss Gorf, which that blows the whole Gorf stands for global whatever. You know, I don't know. Maybe the MS stood for something. I know. When I read that, I was like, "You gotta be kidding me." So
that hurts me.
With that in mind, let's flash forward to the VIC-20 version. Of course, it was published by Commodore and developed by Dave Nutting Associates, which of course that's who made the arcade game. Now, I looked up the guys that actually worked on this, and a couple of them had other games on the VIC. Bill Heindorf had a game called Radar Rat Race, which I think me and Boat referenced once. It's just another game. Andy Finkel had a game called Car Chase on the VIC. Then you also had Jeff Brent, Eric Cotton, Mark Scott, Jimmy Schneider. They were all involved in some capacity and released the game. So what was Gorf released on? A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You had your arcade version, of course. The Atari 2600, which was not great.
It was really trimmed down.
The Atari 5200, which is, I've seen that one, I've not played it. It looks good. The 8-bits on the Atari, which are pretty good. ColecoVision, which was really, I thought was quite good. C64 is pretty good. Now, this has Jag listed on there, the Jaguar. I don't ever remember seeing Gorf on the Jaguar.
It was probably in some kind of compilation.
Well, I mean, what compilation? What compilations can you name with the Jag? Yeah. So you're asking yourself, Gorf on the VIC-20, what's that going to look like? Well, it actually looks pretty good.
Yeah, it does.
Now, Gorf is the levels are all there except for one.
Yes.
And now I have read that Galaxian level was omitted because of copyright reasons. Now, Midway, as I recall, licensed Galaxian. Okay, I think from Namco. I think Galaxians was on a Midway machine. I'm pretty sure about that. That much. So I read this a lot of places that it was left off because of that. I cannot confirm or deny that. This seemed to be a trend on all the home systems that only got 4 screens. My gut tells me that it was because I think Midway sort of did Space Invaders too, right? So all these licensing issues I keep reading about, and I've read that, and I've heard a couple guys mention on YouTube. I don't know about that. I'll be honest with you. I don't. That could just be someone said it once. You know how the internet is. It got picked up everywhere. Yeah. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'd say the more likely scenario is that it flat out wouldn't fit or didn't run correctly. I'd say Galaxia would be probably the most difficult level to do because of the amount of things on the screen, the amount of movement. Unlike Space Invaders, there's a lot of shots coming down. There's a lot of peel-off movement, and maybe it just didn't work. Of course, you're also got to consider that this is the early 80s. You're putting effectively 5 games on one cartridge.
Yeah. And
so they probably looked at what they had and said, okay, what can we get rid of? And that was probably one that, this is just speculation at this point. I'm just guessing. So what's it look like on the VIC? It looks okay. It looks surprisingly good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I thought it looked
the VIC version's a little blockier. Okay?
It is.
And, it's a lot blockier, than the arcade. But, I mean, it's comparable with really most of the other releases.
The visuals are certainly comparable, yeah.
They being able to pull off that 4th level, I think, is impressive because that sort of ties the whole game together when you finally destroy the enemy ship. The flagship, it looks just about like it should. I mean, on the VIC, you get less of everything. You get less
enemies even.
Right, but you still can move up and down. You can't move as far.
Itty bitty.
Yeah, you can't move as far, but you can still move up and down. It still gives you a rank, which we didn't mention, but the arcade version, you get a rank, ensign, and you move up the rank. So they kind of give you a rank on how the on based on how you're doing. Really, it's more of a level. It's a level thing more than anything else. So I thought the sound, I have to say the sound of the VIC actually sort of surprised me. It's not bad. It's sort of 3 voice and I think you also get a noise channel, and it actually like a white noise. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it actually was. I thought it was pretty good. Now when you play a game on the Vic, the Vic only has one joystick port, but it had Atari style joystick port, so you've got a good controller there. Now I had to emulate this, obviously, since I don't have a Vic. I don't think I have one. You never know; it could be one of these boxes. I used my my Raspberry Pi, and I plugged in. I've got a little doohickey, so I plugged in an actual Atari style joystick and played it, and it played well. I really didn't have any trouble with the way it played. I liked the way it sounded. I was actually very surprised that it actually had 4 of the 5 screens. I'm really surprised by that, to be honest with you, because I didn't expect it to have, like, for example, that weird warp circle one, the gyrus one. You could have probably, if I was going to drop one, that would have been the one I would have dropped personally.
That would have been the easiest to drop.
Right.
But that has sort of a faux scaling effect on the enemies.
Yeah,
which means you had to draw all those sprites at different.
Well, my guess is I think that was probably one of the easiest ones to put in. If you want the truth,
I disagree.
Well, it's just not much. I mean, it's just a circle. And there's not that many ships. Like in the Galaxian level, there's a ton of ships flying around. A ton of bullets.
To me, it's not about that. It's about it has different visuals than the other levels. It has scaling. The concept's completely different. The control for you is
scaling. I don't know. It's not really. I don't know what that is that they do. It's not really. Especially on the Vic.
It's fake scaling. It's different sizes sprites, but they had to draw all those again. So.
Yeah. I will say that on the Space Invaders level and a couple other levels, there's a bonus ship that'll fly out.
Yeah.
That appears on the Vic version. The little names appear. I was pretty impressed. I mean, to be honest with you, that it had all the stuff that it did. This game reviewed very well. The Electronic Games of that era wrote that this was a fast-moving, colorful entry. It's a must. One of the best games available for the VIC-20. Ahoy! Do you remember Ahoy? That's a game that's a game I hadn't thought about for a while. They said the VIC-20 version was the best of the bunch, comparing it with several other versions. And admittedly, I looked up to see how the Atari 2600 version of this did, because I vaguely remember playing it. I think I own it. I think I've got it in there.
It's not.
But it was panned by a lot of people, yet still won awards. Remember those ARGs we talked about? It won like an ARG for like one of the best. So I don't know. Maybe it was the pickets were slim. I don't know what happened there. A few other reviews. The Home Computing Weekly from June 28th of 1983 gave it 100%. They loved it. They thought it was great. Electronic Fun with Computers gave it a 75%.
Electronic Fun with Computers.
I remember that.
Right.
Sadly, they lamented that it did not have the cool gun style joystick, but they made those for the Atari, so if you wanted one real bad, you could get one.
What a dumb critique.
They just lamented it. Like I said, I just read a blurb of it, so what are you going to do? The laser level, again, these levels are all sort of cut down. If you look at a Vic, I mean, the resolution's pretty low.
Yeah.
But they did a good job of getting that chunky shooting thing to work. I thought it stood up to the reviews. To put it in perspective, I've never owned a Vic and used it, but I knew about this game on the Vic. I had heard somewhere in the back, it's the synopsis fire. We rolled this on the Wii, and I was like, I know exactly what I'm going to pick. Because this is one game that I for sure knew was on the Vic and was a pretty decent game.
Right.
And so I think it lived up to that. I looked on eBay to see what we had. Vic stuff is actually not too expensive. At least this cartridge. Loose, I saw them for $2, $7, $8, boxed $20. Now get this.
This is the cart?
Wow. The cart boxed, which I thought, man, how many boxed copies is you gonna find? Well, you're gonna find a lot. Now get this. I found boxed copies for $18, $16. Not bad. Then I found some guy in Venezuela selling boxed copies for $20. I don't know why. I thought that was really strange. Every once in a while, when this pops up, there's a dude in Venezuela selling this stuff. So, hey, if you're in Venezuela and you listen to this show, drop me a line. Just to cover it, since I mentioned it earlier, I actually looked up what the VIC was going for. All right,
the actual console,
the VIC 20.
the computer.
You can get a VIC. For somewhere around between $70 and $100, depending on what peripherals come with it, whether it has a modem, I mean, you got to remember that modem was a million seller, believe it or not.
Wow.
And so they're floating around out there. The thing about the VIC, unlike some of the things we've looked at in the past, is this thing was a big seller. And so it's not like there were a million made ever. I mean, there were tons of these things made, and they're still around, and apparently they're still working fine. So, that's my look at Gorf. What did you think of it overall?
I typically hate the set at the bottom, shoot your little guns up the alien affairs. I'm not a Space Invaders fan. Galaga is about the only one I can stomach playing for any amount of time. But one thing I really like about Gorf is it tells a story through its gameplay.
It does.
You start on your planet and you're getting invaded and you fight back the invaders and then you basically chase them into space and take out their high-powered lasers, and then you get to their main force, which I always assumed was on its way to Earth.
All right.
And you intercept them, you take them out. And then, like you said, the Tomb Blood that's you you're heading to the home planet.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see now. You're painting a picture here.
And they're trying to fight you in hyperspace before you get there. And then when you get to the mothership, they have the exact same defense that you, and now you're the attack. You're the bad guy. Well, you're just trying to defend your realm.
I like that, man.
And then
I like that.
So,
I never thought of it that way, but that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how
you should have wrote the docs for this.
But that's always how I played Gorf. Well, not always. I mean, as a kid, I was like, shoot things.
It talk.
Yeah. But that's how I see Gorf, which makes it one of my favorite set at the bottom shoot up games.
All right. Well, good answer.
One of my favorites. I think the VIC-20 version does a remarkable job of holding it all together. Losing the Galaxian screen, to me, makes the game better because I hate that stage. I hate it. It's the most boring, least exciting aspect of the game. So that not being on there on the VIC, to be completely honest, I forgot that stage existed in the arcade for a long time when I was playing this.
One of the things, the Galaxian game has a very cool scoring system. Me and old Chad had a point battle on it for a couple months. And the scoring is real fun, and so you don't quite get the same action on this version.
Right.
And it sort of takes away from it.
This is literally
it's
you
a
at
cut
the bottom
rate.
shooting
It's
up.
a cut rate version. You can get away with cut rate Space Invaders, but when you cut rate Galaxian, it loses something. It's still, I think it's a fine level. I'll actually say one of my favorites, but I can understand what you're saying.
I mean, as a complete package, it's okay. And I enjoy that Gorf takes you through different gameplay elements.
Yes.
None of the levels play like another level, even though it's all the same basic. You're at the bottom shooting up. The moving up and down in your little player space, to me, that's pretty gimmicky.
Well, I mean,
it doesn't really help survivability. It doesn't really add anything to the game.
Well, the way you shoot in Gorf, the closer you are, you only have one bullet going at a time.
Yeah.
So,
right.
I mean, I actually use it. I like it. It gives you listen. We've talked in the old days, even the smallest amount of freedom you get, it was cool.
Yeah, I agree.
And this is a sort of a rare occurrence that you can move up and down.
Right.
Albeit that much.
Right. But to me, it was still a gimmick. And that doesn't make it bad. Gimmicks are fine. But back to the VIC-20, the only thing I felt the VIC-20 really lacked, and it really not to a tremendous amount, but the sound was a little muffled and kind of crappy. But it was still certainly good enough.
I was surprised how much I liked the sound and how good the sound was, but I think I was expecting absolute dirt worse sound, and it ended up being okay.
Yeah,
it was okay.
Did. Overall, I mean, is this a game I'm going to go back and play on the VIC-20? No, because there's better versions. If you can play the arcade version, that's the one you should play.
Fair enough.
However, for a conversion from the arcade, I would say this is probably like an 8 or a 9 out of 10 for me.
They did a good job.
I think they did an excellent job, and really the only reason why I take away points is because it did have to cut a stage.
Right, but they all did it. They all did it.
And some of the stages there was less going on.
Yeah.
But I think it was an excellent game.
I did as well. I figured we might have to kill it, but it was actually
it was really good.
So
really good.
With that out of the way, let's shuffle over and change the pace.
Let me tell you,
your game. Brent, what do you got this week?
Sword of Fargoal. Let me tell you something. It's as polar opposite as Gorf as we can possibly get. Before we talk about SOF, we have to go back.
Now is that what we're calling it now?
That's it.
All right.
We have to go back and we have to talk about Rogue.
Okay, yes, let's talk about Rogue.
Not the first dungeon crawling procedurally generated game, but by far the famous.
Yeah, the most famous of the bunch, and I played this back in the early halcyon days of Aaron.
For those that don't know, Rogue was a game that came out in 1980 that used ANSI characters to portray going through a dungeon. And the point of the game was you had to go, I think it was 20 floors deep, retrieve an artifact, and then bring that back to the surface. All along the while, you would run into different creatures, traps, you would collect gold. Great dungeon crawl type game.
I believe even your armor and your weapons would get hurt and stuff. It was a pretty intense for a little game like that.
It was a game that made its mark far more than just being a game. It actually created a genre called roguelike.
Mm-hmm.
And platformers and shooters, they all kind of talk about what you're doing in a game. Like when you play a shooter, you're going to be shooting things. When you play a platform, you're going to be jumping from platform to platform. Roguelike, if you don't know what rogue is makes no sense. But Rogue had a few claim to fames that actually made a council say, these are the 18 points you have to be a roguelike. And over time...
A council of roguelikes.
Yeah. And over time, those points have been whittled down to now I think it's like 4 points because people, disputed. Some of the points were ridiculous. Like it had to be a top-down view.
Mm-hmm.
It's that kind of stuff. It had to be single player. That kind of stuff eventually got whittled down to where there's 4 points today. But that's not what we're here to talk about. In Rogue, its main factors, I think what everyone remembers and thinks of it fondly, procedurally generated. So when you went into a dungeon, you could have never been in that dungeon before. Everything is randomly placed. The walls are randomly placed. The maze-like structure. What you find and what you fight, all random. Point number 2 about a roguelike that Rogue started, permadeath. There is no continuing. There is no saving. There is, you can't, I messed up, I'm going to reload my level. If you die, you start back from square one.
Old school.
Yes. And probably the third major aspect of Rogue that followed throughout the annals of time is it was an exploration game. You were put into a location, you didn't know where to go, and as you moved around, the map opened up. So with that in mind, in 1982, Sword of Fargoal was released.
Okay.
And it followed almost all of the Rogue footprints. It upgraded graphics to be sprite-based. It had it introduced sound. It introduced better sound than more just beeps and boops. It had healing stations, temples that you could go to. You picked up your gold and you took it to the temple, and that was a way to level up your health.
Which you would see that in some variants. You see a little bit of everything in different variants.
Right.
But yeah, I'd seen that temple gimmick in a Coco version of that.
It also brought forth enchanting your sword. You would pick up weapon upgrades to increase your sword. You could disarm traps now. The rogue element was very, very strong, and it lent itself very well to Sword of Fargoal, and it made itself very popular. The game in its day was pretty well received. It was noted as being an exciting and intriguing adventure games. The graphics were always noted as being beautiful, which I think is a bit of a stretch. I would not call them beautiful, but
they're above serviceable. I mean, in my opinion, you got given the context of the era, I thought they were. I mean, if I'd seen that back in the day, I'd have been very excited.
Yes,
personally,
and that's it was. Of course, it was a huge improvement over ANSI art.
I was going to say, if you come from character graphics like that, these things look like $1 million. You know, compared to that.
Computer Gaming World, a pretty respected magazine, back in 1996, voted it into its top 150 games, putting it at 147.
Not bad.
The game has a huge cult following, even today. It has been replicated, reprogrammed dozens of times. It's had official re-releases on some mobile platforms. It also released on the Commodore 64 and
really an official release?
Yes,
that's crazy. That I did not know.
And its other official release is the iOS.
Because I knew this as those sort of Rogue clones have become quite popular in the mobile scene. Right, a couple years ago they really hit hard.
Yes,
I'd heard of this game. Again, it was one of the few Vic games I've heard of, and I never knew there wasn't any other version of it. To be honest with you, we talked this a couple weeks ago with sort of like Wolfenstein. I like games where you get to explore, and of course I'm a big D&D guy. I like games that have all the D&D stats there. You know, you've got all the tropes. You've got the dwarves and the monsters and treasures and armor and swords. Just loved it. I love it. And this game surprised me. I shouldn't be surprised because, again, this game is the Vic is a contemporary of the Coco, and they have some sort of similar games. And this game reminded me of something you might have played on the Coco in a lot of ways. Of course, if anyone that's old enough have played these roguelike games where you explore. The ones that come to mind, like Telengard's another one that was real popular. If you remember Telengard, and there was a series of those games that was real popular. I dug it, man. I mean, it's simple by today's standards. This is, you're gonna look at it and be like, man, what is this? Well, I mean, if you think about the era of it, and one thing, much like those old Telengard, those old rogues, you could sit down and play this now, looking just like it does, and it's still a perfectly serviceable, fun time.
Yes. It added a ton of different elements. It added a spell casting. You could pick up different spells. It added healing potions. To the formula, to the rogue formula, the chest, would either hold items or traps. So opening those were always kind of risky. And the point
that used to drive me nuts. And when they open up a thing and they hurt you, that's not good.
The plot of the game it's exactly like Rogue. You go down between 15 and 20 floors, and you retrieve the Sword of Fargoal, and then you have to get it out of the dungeon. What makes this way more annoying, and got a lot of complaints from people, is any monster that you attacked or were attacked by after you got the sword could take the sword. And then you'd have to go back down and get it and come back up. So the game was certainly not without its flaws.
Did you get it?
Oh no, I never got the sword. No. Another flaw a lot of people say with the VIC-20 version that they fixed in the Commodore 64 version is, excuse me, you could lose your map, which basically meant you were put somewhere randomly on the level, and all of your progress uncovering the tiles were gone, and you had to do it all again. A lot of people thought that was really cheesy, and they kind of got rid of that in the Commodore 64 version.
Could have been a element of design. It could have been limitations of the hardware.
No, it was 100%. No,
they did it on purpose.
Yeah, it was 100% to lengthen.
I tried, guys.
Artificially lengthen the game.
Oh, I see.
Which it didn't need. Combat in SOF is strictly luck, roleplay based. It looks at your stats versus the monster stats that you ran into. It says like "pow, biff, boom" at the top of the screen in text, and your hit points go down, and you can't see your opponent's hit points. So you kind of say, "Oh, if you initiate the fight, you can run away."
It was like D&D Batman.
Yeah,
sort of reminded me of. I saw that and I was like, "What is this? Wacky."
So if you don't initiate the fight, you can't run. So you're locked into combat.
It's funny that a D&D would adopt that rule years later with the 3rd edition.
Another aspect of the game that was pretty spectacular was gold wasn't used to buy things because there weren't stores in the game at this point. But when you brought gold back to the temple, that was the way you leveled up your hit points. You leveled up your battle stats, and I might have these backwards, by earning experience by defeating monsters. But you earned your other stats, your health stats, by going to the temple, turning in money. I thought that was very unique. I thought that was very interesting.
It's a tithe.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is.
Yeah, I thought that was, again, I'd seen that before. It's not the worst idea.
And of course, there aren't quite as wacky enemies as in Rogue in this game, but it's interesting the way they do it, because you have your dwarves, your elves, your humanoid type creatures that are stronger than your monsters for the most part, but you also have like your werebats and your hobgoblins, and it could be a weak hobgoblin, or it could also be a strong hobgoblin, and that let you know that it was either one below your level or one above your level, or if it just said hobgoblin, it was your level. Right. It was a neat mechanic to give the player information without, saying, well, this is a little bit stronger than you. I thought that was very, very well done.
I thought the Rogues Gallery was like someone picked up the old basic edition monster manual. It's like, okay, I got dwarves, I got bugbear, stick this guy in. I like the fact that, aside from sort of a visual representation, and that's what it was, they tell you what it is. And that makes you, again, your imagination is the most high-resolution, high-def screen there is. And I know what a dwarven guard looks like. I can picture a cool-looking guy, and then I look at what they, it's like,
they did what they did.
They did, but I'm just saying, it's okay.
So this game was released in 1982, and some people wonder, how do these old games hold up? Did their fan base hold up, or is it all rose-tinted glasses? Well, in 2012, the creator of Swords of Fargoal, which is Jeff McCord, said, you know what? I'm bringing it back. And he started a Kickstarter campaign to manufacture and release Swords of Fargoal 2 on iOS and Android platforms, mobile platforms, where it really makes sense, because that's really, in this day and age, that's where they're
vaguely
suitable.
Recall that. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So he had a goal of $50,000, which is a pretty tidy sum for a nostalgic VIC-20 Commodore 64 game. And he made it at literally the 11th hour. It was coming down to the wire. Got a few some people say questionable donations that they think maybe he pushed himself over the top since Kickstarter's an all-or-nothing campaign.
Right.
But he ended the campaign with $50,161.
That is,
and that's spread across 1,163 backers.
that's not bad.
So
That's a lot of backers.
It is for a game. Like I said, a game that's at the point of this Kickstarter was 30 years old.
Did it get released? Oh, there's more to it. Okay.
So the first thing that they did, and this was to kind of bolster the coffers, is they re-released the old game on the iOS
So
platform.
that's why that happened. I understand.
And then the trouble started.
Oh no! One of these stories.
A game that was supposed to release May of 2013, giving them just over a year to finish, got delayed. And updates were pretty strong for the first year of progress, but you knew things were kind of going bad when you started getting a whole lot of woe is me stories from the developer. Oh, my car's having trouble. I still work a job that I'm doing this in my spare time type of thing. So 2013 release date comes and goes, and for the most part, people are giving him a pass because he is still giving updates. Fall of 2014 hits, and people are starting to get a little bit peeved.
As they're wont to do, yeah.
And updates slow down to the point where they stop. And from 2014 to 2017, there's mostly silence about the release of SOF 2.
Yeah.
Well, and what makes people even more angry is the guy is tweeting out for other Kickstarter campaigns that aren't even his. Like, hey, this guy's trying to do this. Why don't you go? My followers, my people, go help this guy out too, which ticks people off.
Yeah.
And in the end, as of recording this, which is 2018, no release. I
was afraid you were going to say that.
There are beta releases not publicly available but have been shown on YouTube. Nothing since 2 or 3 years ago. Most people are considering the project dead. All the goodwill, I shouldn't say all the goodwill, because some people will hold on to these kind of things like grim death, but most of the public goodwill that this guy has been shot. And it's so disappointing because it didn't have to happen. I understand these old developers, and this was certainly a kick 5 years ago, where they say, well, I can still make games. I made this, I can make another one. And they just don't understand that the game has changed. It's not like programming back in the day, which of course had its challenges. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But it's a different world now. One-person games, with a few exceptions of things like Stardew Valley, that's the only one I can think of right off the top of my head. You can't just go it alone, and this guy was trying to go it alone. And to make a new game with updated graphics, updated concepts, with one person with $50,000 simply isn't going to happen.
Yeah. And
now this guy's considered a fraud by a lot. A lot of people say it was just a gimmick to cash grab, and that's unfortunate because the game, like I said, it has a huge following, and you hate to see this happen to games like this.
Well, we covered something on the Amigos, very similar, where the fellow that made Deluxe Galaga was bringing forth a new one. And he ended up passing away before he got it done. But it was a very similar situation. People were upset. It was taking long. It was harder than he thought. So it happens. But thankfully,
focusing back on the game at hand. SOF. If you have a VIC-20 or if you can get this up and running on an emulator, I actually recommend playing the Commodore version. It's a little more well refined. But I really like this game. It is Now, is it fair? Oh, no. No, the game will just right out kill you. I mean, sometimes the first enemy you run into might just be tougher than you can kill you because your stats are randomly generated at the beginning of the game.
But that's the way those games were.
That's
back
exactly
in the day.
how those games
the way
work.
they were.
And you always, you could kind of lure mobs back to the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And in the early levels, the temple's holy ground, so most enemies won't fight you there. So you can go there and just recover your health, and then go back and chip away a little bit more because the damage you do stays. Yeah. So you can kind of pick away at them. I love roguelike games. I love Rogue. In fact, I will probably say I like Rogue more than I like Swords of Fargoal, only because it was the original and it has some wacky, as you like to say, things in it. So
I agree. I liked Rogue a lot.
So, do you like roguelike games?
I do. I used to play. The majority of the stuff I did like that was on the Coco. But I like those games. I liked Rogue. I liked Telengard. All the Telengards. I played those. I believe Epic's put those out. Which look what they did. They also put this out. So I loved them. I used to play them. I thought this was a very surprisingly fun.
Yes.
And I thought the Vic overall, my experience with it was positive. I enjoyed it. I really did.
I think my biggest problem with SOF is it does take a while to load the levels. I mean, they all are random levels, random layouts. I never got into a situation where I was trapped and I couldn't go from one floor to another, but I heard that is a possibility. The long load, though, because it takes from starting the game to being able to move your character around, takes about 2 minutes. I found, and
I thought something was screwed up. I reset twice.
And in a game where you can die in 30 seconds, that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But the difficulty curve, I do like how they made, in the beginning, the mobs can only move like one step to your 8, and that's kind of how they adjust the difficulty later in the game, is eventually the mobs move 1 for 1 for what you move. So it's not like the beginning levels, it's not like you have the same difficulty from beginning to end. It certainly shouldn't be looked at like that. But in a game where you can die 30 seconds after starting for a 2-minute load, that does kind of suck.
It's a fun game of its era.
Yes.
And with that,
I think that's going to wrap us up.
Hit the music.
Yes, lights. All right. Oh, boy. Boy, this is going to be controversial.
Brent, do you want to talk about what we've added this week to the wheel?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand that the consoles and computers can only take us so far.
I don't understand that. I think it's just something we're doing for fun.
Eventually, however, we will run out. So we had to brainstorm and think. And for this week, we have added.
What did we add? Can you see this? Well, we added, I believe it was Pinball of the late 90s. Is that what that one is? So we are going to delve into the realm of pinball a little bit, and which you can see behind us. We know a little bit about pinball.
Yeah,
and we even have some pinballs of the late 90s. Do we have any of the late 90s or early 90s? We've got a little. That one, I can't remember when our machines actually were put out. Do you, off the top of your head? So
not exactly.
It was the 90s. We know
that. So there are, other possibilities on the wheel now.
Yeah. You want to spin this
I'll
thing?
give it a spin.
Give it a whirl, dude. Very good. Give your streak.
Whoa, almost.
What are we? Oh, now this I've been looking forward to. Brent, tell them what we won.
Is that the Sinclair?
No, we've already done the Sinclair. This, my friend, is the Sharp 68,000. Now, this is as timely as today's headline, and I'll tell you why. Let me set that down there. Kim Justice just did a very interesting little article or little video blog or whatever she does, production on the 68,000, and it is it's a Japanese computer with tremendous games, tremendous ports, and I've really always been interested in the chances of getting one here is a 0%. but without paying. And you've got to pay, brother. But I've always wanted to get in there, so I was hoping that would come up. And it's been on the wheel forever. I'm glad it finally came up. Do you have any experience with the 68,000?
Up until it just showed them on the wheel, had no idea it existed.
Outstanding.
So this will be an adventure for me.
So, any parting thoughts this week?
I think both the games we looked at were superior games for the VIC-20.
Yes.
And I think anyone who has access to... Oh, I should mention, Sword of Fargoal on eBay, outrageous. The only one I could find was for the Commodore, the tape, going for $100.
Holy smokes!
So
they probably never got a cart release.
I do not know. So if you can find them, pick them up, play them. Probably gonna have to emulate them though.
So we're back next week with the Sharp X 68,000 Japanese computer and gaming machine. Ooh. And until then,
X's to the right.